It cost him $250 in fines to save $38 a month on heating. Art Donovan, retired Master Sergeant with 25 years in Air Force logistics, had calculated everything except the wrath of a suburban HOA. Replacing leaky windows seemed like common sense. The new vinyl panes promised a 20% drop in utility bills and had the Energy Star labels to prove it. But in Meadowbrook Estates, logic didn't trump bureaucracy. His mistake? Trusting a friendly email over a stamped Form 12C. Now, Art faced daily fines for non-compliant materials, while the HOA treasurer lived unbothered behind the same windows. Art hadn't planned on returning to battle, but this time the enemy wore cardigans, sat on folding chairs, and governed with gavel and grudge. What began as a home upgrade was about to escalate into a tactical campaign, one that would test not only his patience, but the limits of neighborhood power. "We're heating the whole neighborhood, Art," she said one evening, pulling her knitted Afghan tighter around her shoulders. Art lowered his copy of a Tom Clancy novel and looked at the old, double-hung windows that had come with the house. They were handsome in a dated sort of way, with wooden frames that had been painted over a dozen times. But their seals were shot. He could practically see the dollar bills flying out through the glass. "I know, honey. I'm on it," he replied. Being on it for Arthur Donovan was a serious affair. His 25-year career in Air Force logistics had been built on a simple, unshakable foundation. Do your research, follow the procedure, and get it in writing. You didn't just order $1 million worth of jet engine parts on a whim, and you certainly didn't replace the windows on your house in the meticulously governed community of Meadowbrook Estates without doing your homework. For a week, Art became a student of the Meadowbrook HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. He sat at his desk with a highlighter and a legal pad, the dense booklet spread open like an enemy battle plan. He cross-referenced bylaws and downloaded architectural request forms. Finally, he drafted a polite, precise email to the Architectural Review Committee, ARC. He attached a brochure for the new, energy-efficient vinyl windows he'd chosen, a tasteful, double-pane model in classic white, complete with their Energy Star rating and warranty information. 3 days later, a reply landed in his inbox from a Mr. Henderson on the committee. The tone was casual, almost breezy. "Hi, Art. Thanks for the detailed info. Looks fine to me. A big improvement over those old drafty things, I bet. Go ahead." Bill Henderson, ARC. Art printed the email, highlighted Mr. Henderson's name, and enthusiastic, "Go ahead," and filed it in a new manila folder labeled Windows. That, he thought, was that. Procedure followed. Approval granted. Mission go. The installation took 2 days. The crew was professional, and the result was transformative. The new windows slid open with a whisper quiet shush. They sealed tight against the outside world, and the house felt instantly calmer, more secure. That evening, Susan sat in her reading chair, basking in the draft-free comfort. "Oh, Art, this is wonderful," she said, her voice full of genuine delight. "It feels like a new house." Art felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. This was what retirement was supposed to be about: simple comforts, smart decisions, and a quiet life well earned. For 2 blissful, peaceful weeks, it was exactly that. Then the letter came. It arrived not in the regular mail, but via certified post, requiring a signature. Art's internal alarm, honed by decades of dealing with official correspondence, immediately went on high alert. He saw the return address, Meadowbrook Estates HOA, and signed Arthur Donovan with a furrowed brow. Inside, on thick, imposing letterhead, signed by the HOA president herself, Carol Petty, was a single sheet of paper that felt colder than any winter draft. It was a formal notice of violation. It cited a breach of Bylaw 6.2b regarding uniformity of exterior materials. It informed him that his new vinyl windows were a non-compliant architectural feature. And it concluded with a sentence that made the blood drain from his face. A fine of $50 per day will be assessed until the violation is rectified. For a long moment, Art just stood in his hallway, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. His first reaction wasn't anger, but a profound sense of disbelief, the kind a logistician feels when a perfectly synchronized shipment arrives at the wrong continent. It had to be a mistake, a bureaucratic mix-up. Mr. Henderson had said, "Go ahead." It was right there in black and white. "What is it, honey?" Susan asked, coming out of the kitchen. "It's a letter from the HOA," Art said, his voice flat. "They're fining us $50 a day for the windows." Susan's face fell. "But they approved it. You showed me the email." "I know," Art said, his resolve hardening. "It's a mistake. I'll clear it up at the board meeting on Thursday. Don't you worry." He approached the Thursday meeting with the same calm preparedness he'd once brought to a mission briefing. He wore a pressed polo shirt and clean slacks. In his hand was his Windows folder, the email from Bill Henderson placed right on top. He wasn't there for a fight. He was there for a clarification, a simple correction of the record. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with fluorescent lighting and a dozen uncomfortable fold-in chairs. At the front sat the 5-member board, with Carol Petty in the center seat. She was a woman in her mid-60s with a helmet of perfectly coiffed iron gray hair and a pearl necklace that seemed a little too tight. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel, her eyes scanning the small crowd with an air of regal impatience. When the floor opened for homeowner concerns, Art was the first to stand. He calmly introduced himself and explained the situation, keeping his tone respectful and matter-of-fact. "So, as you can see," he concluded, holding up the printed email, "I received prior approval from a member of the ARC, Mr. Henderson, right here." He looked toward the end of the table where a nervous, balding man, Bill Henderson, was steadfastly avoiding his gaze. Carol Petty did not look at the email. She looked at Art, a thin, condescending smile playing on her lips. "Mr. Donovan, is it? While I appreciate your enthusiasm for paperwork, a casual email does not and has never constituted a formal approval. For that, you would need to have submitted Form 12C, the application for exterior alteration, and received a signed, stamped copy back from the board. Did you do that, Mr. Donovan?" "No, well, the email from your committee member said—" "The email is irrelevant," Carol cut him off, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "Mr. Henderson, who is new to the committee, was mistaken. He has been corrected on the proper procedure. The fact remains that your home is in violation of Bylaw 6.2b. The fines stand." She looked pointedly at Henderson. "Do you have anything to add, Bill?" Bill Henderson shrank in his chair, his face turning a blotchy red. No, Madam President. She's right. It was a mistake on my part. I apologize for the confusion, Mr. Donovan." The air in the room was thick with humiliation. Art felt a hot flush creep up his neck. He wasn't just being corrected. He was being publicly dismissed, made an example of. He looked at the other board members, who stared down at their notes, and at the other homeowners, who suddenly found the scuff marks on their shoes. Fascinating. He had come for a clarification and had been handed a defeat. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice tight with restraint. He sat down, the useless email still in his hand. After the meeting, as Art was making his way toward the door, a woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile gently touched his arm. She was older, perhaps in her mid-70s. "You're Arthur Donovan, aren't you?" she said in a low voice. "I'm Eleanor Vance, lived here 20 years. "A pleasure," Art managed. "Don't let Carol get to you," Eleanor whispered, leaning in slightly. "She loves her rules more than she loves people. She also loves spending our money. You might find it interesting to ask for a look at the financials sometime, especially the landscaping budget." She gave him a conspiratorial wink and melted back into the crowd. Still processing the strange encounter, Art felt another presence at his side. It was his next-door neighbor, Dave Chen, a young tech engineer Art only knew well enough to wave to. "Hey, Mr. Donovan, that was rough," Dave said, his expression full of sympathy. "That woman's a nightmare. Last year she tried to fine me because my daughter's playset was not in harmony with the natural landscape. It's beige." Art couldn't help but let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sounds about right." "Listen," Dave said, lowering his voice. "I'm pretty good with computers and online research. If you decide to, fight this, and you need any help, just let me know. What she did in there wasn't right." Art nodded, a genuine sense of gratitude cutting through his frustration. "Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that." Back in the quiet of his study, Art sat at his desk for a long time. The Windows folder lay open before him. The cheerful email from Bill Henderson seemed to mock him. He realized then that his initial assessment had been wrong. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't about procedure or clarification. This was a different kind of engagement entirely. He took a deep breath the way he used to before a complex briefing. He picked up a pen and, on the cover of the manila folder, he crossed out the simple word Windows. In its place, in neat, steady block letters, he wrote Operation Freedom's View. This was no longer a homeowner's file. It was now an after-action report, and the mission had just begun. The first entry in the log for Operation Freedom's View was dated the Friday after the board meeting. Art wrote not with anger, but with the cool precision of a man documenting a critical failure to identify its root cause. He detailed the meeting, Carol Petty's exact words, Bill Henderson's coerced apology, and the passive expressions of the other board members. He noted the daily fine accumulation, now at $1,050, in a column on the right side of the page. He was building a case, brick by painstaking brick. This wasn't just about his windows anymore. It was about the principle. A system that could be manipulated by one person's whim wasn't a system at all. It was tyranny in miniature. The next morning, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to Dave Chen. "Dave, it's Art Donovan from next door," he began. "I'd like to take you up on that offer of help, if it still stands." "Absolutely, Mr. D." Dave's voice was full of energy. "What's the plan?" An hour later, they were sitting at Dave's dining room table, his sleek laptop open between them. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. "In the service, before any mission, we do reconnaissance," Art explained, pushing a small notebook toward Dave. "I need to know the battlefield. You mentioned others might have similar violations. I want to know if Carol is enforcing the rules consistently, or just against me." "Selective enforcement," Dave said, a grin spreading across his face. "I love it. It's a classic bully tactic. Let's go hunting." What followed was a masterclass in modern suburban espionage. Dave didn't just walk around the neighborhood with a camera. He pulled up Meadowbrook Estates on Google Maps and activated the Street View feature. "The beauty of this," he explained, "is the historical data." He clicked on a small clock icon. "We can go back in time." He patiently drove down every virtual street in their subdivision, toggling back through images from previous years. It took nearly an hour of meticulous scanning. "Okay, look," Dave said, zooming in on a blue two-story house on Mulberry Lane. "Those look like vinyl sliders to me. Let's check the date. 2021, well before you moved in." He quickly cross-referenced the address with the county's public property database. "Owner, Jonathan Gable." Art wrote the name and address down. "Anyone we know?" "You're not going to believe this," Dave said, clicking another link. He pulled up the HOA's last newsletter. "Jonathan Gable is the HOA treasurer." Art stared at the screen, a slow, grim smile forming on his own face. It was better than he could have hoped. They spent another 30 minutes and found 2 more properties with similar, non-compliant windows, both of which had been installed years ago without issue. Dave saved screenshots, complete with date stamps, and printed them in high resolution. The first piece of ammunition was secured. That evening, after thanking Dave for his invaluable help, Art embarked on his solo mission. With a fresh cup of coffee and a powerful reading lamp, he once again opened the HOA covenants. This time, he wasn't just reading for compliance. He was reading like a lawyer preparing for trial, searching for the single sentence that could unravel the prosecution's case. He read past the obvious sections on architectural standards and fines. He delved into the deep, boring parts, the appendices, the definitions, the articles on board governance that most people skipped. His eyes were tired, and the legalistic language was starting to blur. He was deep into a section on committee powers and limitations when he found it. It wasn't flashy, it was a simple subsection, tucked away as if it were an afterthought. Bylaw 11-9A, Committee Discretion and Homeowner Indemnity. His finger traced the words, "Any home improvement modification undertaken by a homeowner in good faith, based on written or electronic correspondence that could be reasonably interpreted as approval from any sitting committee member, shall not be subject to penalty or forced removal. Should said approval be subsequently rescinded by the board." Art read it again, and a third time. Good faith, electronic correspondence, reasonably interpreted as approval. It was a shield, a perfect, unbreakable shield, crafted by the HOA's own lawyers, likely to protect the association itself from lawsuits over the careless mistakes of its own volunteer committee members. And Bill Henderson's email, "Looks fine to me. Go ahead," was the key that turned the lock. The fines, the threats, the public humiliation, all of it was null and void under their own rules. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the past few weeks lifting from his shoulders. He felt a quiet, profound sense of victory. He now had evidence of hypocrisy and a legal statute from their own governing documents. He had the sword and the shield. He looked across the room at the phone. There was still one more front to open in this campaign. He thought of Eleanor Vance's cryptic advice at the meeting. Ask for a look at the financials, especially the landscaping budget. Art picked up the phone and dialed. "Eleanor, it's Arthur Donovan. I believe you suggested I might find the HOA's accounting to be interesting reading. I think it's time I took a look." Eleanor Vance's mind was as sharp as a freshly sharpened pencil. When Art met with her the following afternoon, she had already outlined the exact procedure required by state law for a homeowner to inspect an HOA's financial records. It wasn't a request, it was a right. "They'll try to delay," Eleanor said, peering over her reading glasses at Art. They sat at her kitchen table, which was covered in neat stacks of paper. "They'll say the records are with the management company or that they need 30 days' notice. Don't buy it. You are entitled to timely access." Guided by her expertise, Art drafted a formal, legally sound letter. It didn't just ask to see the books. It requested specific documents: the detailed general ledger for the past 2 fiscal years, all vendor contracts exceeding $1,000, and a line-item breakdown of the grounds maintenance and landscaping budget, which, as Eleanor had suspected, had ballooned by nearly 40% since Carol Petty took over as president. Art sent the letter via certified mail, creating another entry in his growing file. The request was a silent, strategic missile launched directly into the heart of the HOA's boardroom. The impact was immediate. Carol Petty held Art's letter in her hand as if it were contaminated. She had received a panicked call from Jonathan Gable, the treasurer, the moment he'd heard. "He's asking for the landscaping contracts, Carol, the ones with your brother-in-law's company." "Calm down, Jonathan," Carol had snapped, though her own heart was hammering against her ribs. This man, this retired sergeant, was no longer just an annoyance. He was a threat. He was pulling at threads she had assumed were buried deep within the fabric of her authority. Her power in Meadowbrook was absolute precisely because no one had ever dared to look this closely. She had built her reign on a foundation of resident apathy and fear. This man, with his meticulous nature and his quiet refusal to be intimidated, threatened to bring the entire structure down. She saw only one path forward. She couldn't fight him on the financial front. Not yet, not without exposing things she didn't want exposed. She had to crush him on the battlefield she had chosen, the windows. She had to make an example of him so terrifying that no one else would ever dream of challenging her again. She had to raise the stakes from a simple fine to the threat of a person's home. 2 days later, the second certified letter arrived at the Donovan residence. Susan was the one who signed for it this time, and she brought it to Art with a worried look. This letter was even more imposing than the first. It was a notice of special executive meeting. Pursuant to Bylaw 14.7, it read, "The board will meet to vote on the matter of placing a lien on the property at 124 Chestnut Drive for failure to cure a violation and for non-payment of accrued fines, totaling $4,250. Susan's hand flew to her mouth. "A lien? Art, they can't be serious. They want to put a lien on our house? Over windows?" The fear in her voice was real. This had escalated beyond a neighborhood squabble into something that threatened their security, the very home they had planned to live in for the rest of their lives. Art took the letter from her and put a steadying arm around her shoulder. He looked at her, his eyes calm and resolute. "Yes, they are serious," he said, "but they are also desperate. This is what cornered people do. Don't worry, Susan, I'm prepared for this. They have no idea how prepared I am." The night before the special meeting, Art's living room became a war room. He had assembled his team. Dave Chen sat on the sofa, his laptop glowing, while Eleanor Vance occupied an armchair, a file of her own notes in her lap. "Okay," Art said, standing before them like he was briefing a flight crew. "Here's the order of battle. Dave, you'll have the presentation queued up. We start with the photos." "I've got them," Dave confirmed. "High-resolution shots of the treasurer's house and the others, right alongside a photo of yours, labeled Exhibit A, Selective Enforcement." "Good," Art nodded. "After I present that, I'm going to question the legality of the fines themselves, citing Bylaw 11.9a. Eleanor, this is where I'll mention that we have questions about the board's fiduciary duty, which has prompted a formal request to review the financials." Eleanor smiled, a glint in her eye. "That should get their attention. The moment you mention fiduciary duty, their insurance carrier gets nervous." "Exactly," Art said. "We are not going in there angry. We are going in with facts, evidence, and their own rulebook. We will be calm, professional, and relentless. The truth is our weapon. We just have to present it clearly." They worked for another hour, refining the presentation, anticipating Carol's likely reactions, and timing out their remarks. There was a quiet intensity in the room, the energy of a team that knows it holds a winning hand and is just waiting for the right moment to play it. As Dave and Eleanor left, they wished Art luck. He closed the door and turned to Susan, who stood by the fireplace, still looking apprehensive. He took her hands in his. "I know you're worried," he said softly, "but tomorrow isn't about windows anymore. It's about doing what's right. It's about not letting a bully win. And we are not going to lose." The clubhouse was packed, with more residents standing along the back wall than seated in the folding chairs. The air was thick with a mixture of curiosity and tension. This wasn't a typical boring board meeting. This was a public showdown, and everyone knew it. Art and Susan found seats near the front. Art gave her hand a reassuring squeeze as Carol Petty banged the gavel, her face a mask of cold authority. "This special executive meeting is now in session," Carol announced, her voice ringing with false solemnity. She spent several minutes detailing the history of the violation, framing Art as a defiant homeowner who believed he was above the rules that held their beautiful community together. She spoke of standards, of property values, of the need for aesthetic harmony. "Therefore," she concluded, her voice sharp and final, "I move that the board vote to authorize our legal counsel to place a lien on the property at 124 Chestnut Drive for failure to cure the outstanding violation. All in favor?" She raised her hand, and 2 other board members, her loyal lieutenants, slowly followed suit. The treasurer, Jonathan Gable, hesitated, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "The motion is on the floor," Carol said, ignoring the treasurer's reluctance. "Mr. Donovan, you have 5 minutes to speak before the final vote." This was the moment. Art stood and walked to the front of the room, placing his folder on the small lectern. He looked out at his neighbors, his expression not angry or defensive, but calm and earnest, like a teacher about to explain a complex but important lesson. "Thank you, Madam President," he began, his voice steady and clear, filling the room. "I don't need 5 minutes. The truth doesn't take that long. My wife and I installed new windows to save on our energy bills and make our home more comfortable. We did so only after receiving what any reasonable person would interpret as approval from this association's own committee." He paused and nodded to Dave, who was sitting in the front row with his laptop. "Dave, Exhibit A, please." An image flashed onto the portable projector screen Art had set up. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left, a photo of Art's new windows. On the right, a crystal-clear shot of the windows on Jonathan Gable's house. The windows were, for all practical purposes, identical. "These," Art said, pointing to the photo on the right, "are the windows on the home of your treasurer, Mr. Gable. They have been installed for 3 years. I have to ask the board, why does Bylaw 6.2b apply to a retired Air Force sergeant, but not to one of your own?" A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Jonathan Gable turned the color of spoiled milk. Carol's gavel banged sharply. "This is out of order. We are not here to discuss other properties." "With all due respect," Art continued, his voice never rising, "this is precisely what we should be discussing, the fair and equal application of the rules. But let's set that aside. Let's talk about your own bylaws." He nodded to Dave again. The screen changed, now showing the full text of Bylaw 11.9a. Next to it, Dave flashed a copy of Bill Henderson's email. Bylaw 11.9a, written by this HOA's own lawyers, clearly states that a homeowner who acts in good faith based on electronic correspondence from a committee member cannot be penalized. The email from Mr. Henderson is my proof. Therefore, under the very rules you claim to be upholding, these fines are illegal. The threat of a lien is baseless. The room was silent for a beat, and then it erupted. The murmurs became outright talking. One man shouted, "She's right. He's got her dead to rights." And finally, Art said, his voice cutting through the noise, which immediately subsided, "There is the matter of the board's fiduciary duty." He turned his gaze directly to Carol. "We have formally requested to see the financial records, specifically to understand why our landscaping costs have risen 40% in 2 years, especially since the primary landscaping contract is held by a company owned by your own brother-in-law, Madam President." That was it, the final, fatal blow. The room exploded. It was no longer about windows. It was about everything. People were on their feet, shouting questions at the board. Amid the chaos, a voice squeaked, "She pressured me." All eyes turned to Bill Henderson, who was now standing, his face streaked with sweat and relief. "Carol told me I had to rescind the approval. She said we had to make an example of him." The tide had not just turned, it was a tsunami. Eleanor Vance stood up, her voice ringing with clarity. "I move to dismiss all fines and actions against the Donovan property." "Seconded," roared a half-dozen voices. The vote was a deafening chorus of ayes. Before Carol could even react, Eleanor spoke again. I also move for a vote of no confidence in Carol Petty as president of this HOA. The aye was thunderous. Carol Petty stared out at the sea of angry faces. Her authority evaporated, her face pale with shock. She grabbed her purse, pushed her chair back, and fled the room without another word. In the aftermath, a group of homeowners, led by Eleanor and Dave, surrounded Art. You need to run this board, Art, one said. You're the only one we trust. Art looked at Susan, who was beaming with pride, and then back at his neighbors. I'll serve, he said, a small smile on his face, but only for one term, to get the ship righted and rewrite the rulebook so this never happens again. A few weeks later, the dust had settled, but something in Art Donovan had shifted. The quiet man who once believed procedure was armor had come to understand its limits and its purpose. He hadn't just replaced windows, he'd torn down walls, ones built from apathy and fear. He no longer saw his neighbors as strangers behind hedges and garage doors, but as people capable of courage when given a voice. And he, once reluctant, had become their voice, steady, clear, and unshaken. What began as a solitary fight had turned into a collective awakening. In standing up to the HOA, Art had rediscovered something he'd thought he'd left behind in uniform. Duty, not to rules, but to fairness, to truth. He had learned that sometimes leadership means showing up not with orders, but with patience, evidence, and a willingness to listen, especially when others are too afraid to speak. There's a strange clarity that comes with age, he realized, a knowing that comfort is not found in silence, but in knowing you did the hard thing when it mattered most. That real peace is earned, not inherited. As twilight deepened, Art sat beside Susan, a hand resting gently in hers. Through the new, crystal-clear window, they watched children pedal bikes down the once quiet street, and neighbors paused to wave. No gavel, no title, no threat could ever take that view away again. And, for the first time in years, the house felt not just warmer, but truly home.